Leonora Ashford heard the motor car before she saw it, the grinding climb of an engine on the gravel drive, a sound she had not heard in 6 weeks. She was at the kitchen window with her hands pressed flat against the sill, and when she recognized it, she closed her eyes and stood very still. She had rehearsed this. She had rehearsed it while walking the 3 miles back from Dr. Pemberton's office on a Tuesday afternoon, with the summer heat pressing down on her, and the knowledge sitting heavy in her chest like a stone she had swallowed. She had rehearsed it in the narrow hours of the morning when sleep refused her, and the house was dark and the only sound was Nell moving quietly through the kitchen below, starting the stove. She had rehearsed what she would say and what she would not say. What she would never let him see on her face. Graham Ashford stepped out of the motor car with a briefcase in one hand and his hat in the other, and Leonora recognized the briefcase. Dark leather, brass fittings, as the kind he used for documents that required signatures. She had signed their marriage certificate across that same table, in this same house 2 years ago. She knew what it meant when Graham Ashford brought the briefcase. She set down her cup, she smoothed the front of her dress. She walked to the front of the house and opened the door before he could knock. He stood at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her with the expression she had catalogued over 2 years of marriage, careful, composed, slightly caught. Graham was not a man who liked being anticipated. He was 34 years old, and had the face of someone who had spent a long time making sure his face communicated exactly what he chose for it to communicate, and nothing else. "Leonora," he said. "Graham," she said. Neither of them moved. Then he said, "May I come in?" She stepped back from the door without answering, which was answer enough. Harwick, Connecticut, had been in the middle of its longest dry spell in 7 years. The fields behind the house had gone pale and cracked at the edges, and the Ashford elm at the property line had dropped half its leaves a month early, as if it had simply decided summer was not worth completing. Leonora had thought about that elm more than once in the weeks since Graham left. The way things dropped what they couldn't afford to carry. She had found out 12 days ago. Dr. Pemberton had told her in his plain, unhurried way, sitting across from her in his examination room on the edge of Harwick Center, saying the words the way a man says something difficult when he has learned that decoration only delays the landing. She had not cried. She had thanked him. She had paid with coins from the small tin she kept inside her sewing box, money her father had pressed into her hand the week of her wedding. Keep something that is yours alone, Leonora. A woman should always have something that is only hers. She had walked home, 3 miles on the summer road alone, and she had not told a single person. Not Nell, who ran the house with the calm authority of a woman who had seen everything twice and was not impressed by any of it. Not her cousin Prue, who visited on Thursdays and noticed absolutely everything and mentioned most of it. Not Graham's Aunt Rowena, who had written twice since Graham left. Both letters the kind that were technically polite and actually pointed, and who would have found a way to use any news Leonora gave her before Leonora had decided how to use it herself. And certainly not Graham. She understood with a clarity that had surprised her, there on that long walk home in the July heat, exactly what the news would do if she told him. It would not bring him back for the right reasons. And Leonora Vance Ashford, she still thought of herself that way sometimes, her father's daughter first, had made a decision somewhere between the elm and the kitchen door that she intended to keep. She would not be anyone's obligation. Not again. Graham set the briefcase on the parlor table and unfastened the brass clasps and drew out a document. Heavy paper, formal, the kind that had been prepared by a lawyer who billed by the paragraph. "My aunt has retained a solicitor in Hartford," he said. He paused in the way men pause when they are reciting something they have rehearsed and have not quite convinced themselves of yet. "There is an argument to be made, a procedural matter with the original marriage filing. The county clerk made an error in the registration." He laid the document flat between them, but did not push it toward her. The marriage could be dissolved without formal fault attributed to either party. Leonora looked at the document. She did not touch it. "Your aunt retained a solicitor," she said. "Yes." "And what do you believe, Graham?" He was quiet for too long. That silence said everything both of them already knew. "I believe," he said carefully, "that you deserve better than a marriage held together by nothing but legal inertia." "Stop." Her voice was quiet. It did not shake. She had practiced that too, the steadiness of it, the absence of trembling. "Please don't tell me what I deserve as though that's yours to decide." He stopped. You came here with papers, she said. Your aunt's solicitor prepared them. You're presenting this as a kindness to me. She looked at him steadily. I want you to stand in this house and hear yourself say that out loud. Something crossed his face. Something that in another man might have been shame, but in Graham Ashford was harder to name. Because he kept it so tightly controlled that the difference between discomfort and genuine remorse was almost invisible. That isn't the whole of it, he said. Then tell me the whole of it. Another silence. Outside, the elm dropped something, a branch, a cluster of dead leaves, and it landed without ceremony on the dry grass below. Arabella Holt, he said. Leonora had known the name was coming. She had known it the way you know a storm is forming when the light goes flat in the afternoon. Not from certainty, but from the body's reading of signs. Arabella Holt was 23 years old and the only daughter of one of Hartford's most connected banking families. And Rowena Caldwell had been trying to arrange that particular match for the better part of 3 years, including the 2 years Leonora had been Graham's wife. Your aunt's choice, Leonora said. My family's expectation. That is not the same as your choice. They aren't always separate things. They are always separate things, Graham. She kept her voice even. A man who can't distinguish between his own wants and what his family has decided for him is a man who has spent his whole life calling other people's decisions his own. He looked away toward the window. She had not intended to say it that sharply. She watched it land, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his hands tightened around the edge of the table, and she did not take it back, because it was true and he knew it was true and they both knew it. Sit down, she said instead. Nell will bring coffee. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had come prepared for tears or cold refusal and had not come prepared for coffee. Leonora. Sit down, Graham. We're going to have this conversation like two people who once made a promise to each other, and we're going to do it properly. He sat. Nell appeared with the coffee tray and a look that communicated an entire editorial about Graham Ashford without a single word, set it down, and left with the dignity of a woman who had seen a great deal and was reserving judgment only because she had decided it wasn't yet time to deliver the verdict. Leonora poured. She handed him his cup. She sat across from him with her own and waited. Tell me what your aunt offered, she said. Graham wrapped both hands around the cup. Harwick remains in your name, the house, the land, the outbuildings. There would be a quarterly allowance, more than sufficient to live on. You would want for nothing material. Nothing material, she repeated. That's correct. And in exchange I sign a document and become a woman whose marriage was dissolved on a clerical error before she's 27 years old. She looked at him. Your aunt has been thorough. What she has not been is honest about her reasons. Graham's jaw worked slightly. She believes Arabella Holt is a better match for the family's position. For the family's position, Leonora said, not for yours. Those aren't always. They are always separate things, she said again. I already said that once. He was quiet. She had wanted to ask him directly, the way her father had taught her to ask the questions that mattered. Without ornamentation, watching the face to see what the answer did to it. Do you love her? Did you ever love me? Is there any part of you that came back here hoping I would give you a reason to stay? She did not ask. Because she had promised herself on that walk home that she would not do anything that felt like begging. Not for love, not for acknowledgement, not for the basic human recognition that she was a person and not a problem to be administratively resolved. You left in April, she said instead. You wrote me 3 times in 6 weeks. 2 of those letters were about the Harwick property taxes. The third was about whether the north fence had been inspected. She held his gaze. You did not ask how I was. You did not ask whether I was lonely or frightened or struggling. You asked about the fence. He had the grace not to defend himself. And then your aunt wrote to me, she continued. Not you, your aunt with a preliminary notice from the Hartford solicitor. I received that from Rowena Caldwell, Graham, not from you. I know, he said, low. Then don't sit in my house and tell me you didn't come here to hurt me. The choice to let your aunt send that letter instead of coming here yourself was a choice. It hurt, you knew it would. She looked at him. What you came here not to do is acknowledge how you hurt me. There is a difference. Graham set the cup down. He pressed one hand briefly over his face and then dropped it. You're right, he said. She had not expected that. You're right, he said again. I handled it badly. I should have come in April. Before any of this became legal documents and solicitors. He looked at his hands. I didn't know what to say to you. What stopped you? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had dropped to something quieter than his usual register. I was afraid of what I'd see in your face when I tried to explain myself. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the precursor to it. The recognition of a man telling the truth about something he would rather not have said. Graham, she said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer, not diplomatic, honest. All right. Do you want this marriage to be over? The silence that followed was the longest one yet, the dry heat pressed against the parlor windows. The elm was still out there, dropping what it couldn't hold. I don't know, he said finally. It came out rough. God help me, I don't know. And Leonora, who had pressed both hands flat against the kitchen sill that morning and rehearsed her composure, felt it fracture. Not visibly, not completely, but in the place underneath, where the real things lived. Because I don't know was not a yes. She had built the entire architecture of her morning around withstanding a yes. I don't know was so much harder. She stood. She crossed the window, not to look at anything in particular, but because she needed 3 feet of space between herself and the document, and the man, and the feeling, pressing against the inside of her chest like something that had run out of room. She stood at the window with her back to him, her hands clasped in front of her, looking out at the pale fields and the early dropping elm and the long dry road that ran down toward town. She pressed one hand briefly against her abdomen, then dropped it. I cannot make that decision for you, she said, still facing the window. You know that about me. I know, he said. What I can tell you is that I will not sign a document because your aunt believes it is convenient. She turned to face him. If you want to end this marriage, Graham, then you need to look me in the eye and tell me, not your aunt, not a solicitor, not this piece of paper, you, that you want it over. He looked at her across the parlor in the full afternoon light. Can you do that? She asked. He opened his mouth. He closed it. No, he said. He stayed for the rest of the afternoon, not because she invited him precisely, but because neither of them made a move toward ending the conversation. And Nell brought a second pot of coffee without being asked, and the day moved forward the way days do, indifferent to the wreckage of human planning, requiring nothing except that they continue to occupy time. He left at 5 o'clock with the briefcase, and the document unsigned. He stood at the top of the porch steps with his hat in his hand, and told her he would be at the Whitfield Inn in town for a few days. I know where the Whitfield Inn is, she said. He nodded. He looked at her one more time in that careful reading way, like a man studying a letter he wasn't sure he understood. Then he put his hat on, got into the motor car, and drove back down the drive. Leonora stood in the doorway and watched until the dust settled. Then she went inside and sat at the kitchen table and put both hands flat on the wood and let herself feel, for the first time since Dr. Pemberton's office, exactly how afraid she was. Not of Graham, not of the document. Of the moment she knew was coming. When time would make the choice for her, when she would have to stand in front of him and tell the truth, and find out once and for all, whether he was a man who would choose her, or only a man who would feel obligated. The letter from Rowena Caldwell arrived 3 days later. It was written in the precise, careful prose of a woman who had spent 40 years understanding that language is most dangerous when it appears most courteous. 2 pages. It opened with expressions of concern for Leonora's health and well-being. It proceeded through a summary of the legal position. And then, in the 3rd paragraph, it arrived at its actual purpose. Mrs. Caldwell had become aware, she wrote, that Leonora had recently consulted Dr. Pemberton in town. She wished to inquire, in the spirit of family concern, whether there was any matter pertaining to Leonora's health that the family ought to be made aware of, given the ongoing procedural questions regarding the marriage. Leonora read that paragraph twice. She folded the letter along its original crease lines, put it back in the envelope, and held it in both hands for a moment. Graham had not told her about the doctor visit. He had not known about it himself, which meant Rowena Caldwell had someone in Harwick asking questions. In a town of 400 people, a woman driving herself to the doctor and paying in cash was the kind of thing that got noticed. Nell, she said. How long before Mrs. Caldwell knew about my appointment with Dr. Pemberton? Nell set down the pot she was drying. 48 hours, she said, without any particular surprise. That woman has had ears in this county for 20 years. It's how she keeps winning." Leonora did not answer the letter that day. She thought about it the way her father had taught her to think about things that required precision. From every angle, without rushing to the most satisfying response before she had considered all of them. Rowena Caldwell had 3 possible reasons for writing that letter. Leonora did not like any of them. She went to the writing desk in the late afternoon and composed a reply. "Dear Mrs. Caldwell, I thank you for your concern. I am in good health and have no news to share at this time. Yours respectfully, Leonora Ashford." She read it back. It gave nothing. It confirmed neither denial nor admission. Her father would have approved. She sealed it and gave it to Nell to post. Then she sat at the writing desk for a long time and thought about the phrase she had used. At this time. The clock on her situation was biological. It did not care about her plans or her principles or the careful architecture of her decisions. In 6 weeks, perhaps 8, there would be news whether she chose to share it or not. The question was not whether Graham would find out. The question was whether she would be the one to tell him, on her own terms, for her own reasons, or whether Rowena Caldwell would find out first. She rode into town the following morning on her own. The Whitfield Inn sat at the corner of Center and Prospect, a respectable establishment where men with money and complicated business stayed when they didn't want to be guests in anyone's house. She found Graham in the reading room with a newspaper he was not reading. She could tell from the door, from the way he was staring at the page without moving it. The way a person stares at something when their mind is pointed somewhere else entirely. He looked up when she came in, surprise, then something sharper and more complicated. Then the careful settling back into composure. She sat down across from him without waiting. "Your aunt wrote to me," she said. The composure did not crack, but it shifted. "When?" "The morning after you came to Harwick. She expressed concern for my health and noted that I had recently consulted Dr. Pemberton." She folded her hands on the table. "You didn't know about the appointment, which means she had someone watching my movements, Graham. Someone who reported back." He was quiet for 2 beats. "I didn't tell her," he said. "I know you didn't. That's the point. That is the man whose advice you have been following. Someone who thinks your wife's medical appointments are intelligence to be gathered." Something moved through his face, not anger yet, something below it, something foundational being tested. She told him the letter's contents precisely, from memory. He was quiet for a long moment, then, "What did you tell her?" "That I was in good health and had no news to share at this time." She held his gaze. "She will not leave it at that. She suspects something. That letter was not written by a woman asking a genuine question." "No," he said flatly, "it wasn't. Which is why I'm here." She looked at him directly. "This situation has a timeline that is no longer entirely under my control, Graham. And I will not allow myself to be managed by a woman who had someone watching me without my knowledge. If decisions are going to be made about this marriage, they need to be made by the people who are actually in it." He held her gaze. "You're not telling me everything." It was not a question. It landed with quiet precision. She looked at her hands. She thought about Dr. Pemberton's office. She thought about her father's voice, and the 3 miles home in the heat, and the decision she had made that would not bend no matter how much pressure she applied to it from the outside. "No," she said finally, "I'm not." The words cost her something. She felt the cost of them, the expenditure of letting a wall down by an inch. "Are you going to tell me?" he asked. "Not today. Not until I understand where you actually stand. Not what your aunt wants. Not what the document says. Where you stand." He breathed once, slowly. "How do I prove that to you?" "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "But I'll know it when I see it." She stood. She looked at him one more time. This man she had married in good faith, who had left in April. Who had come back with legal papers. Who had said "I don't know" in a voice she had not been able to stop hearing. "Your aunt's letter arrived before you did," she said. "That tells me everything about how this has been managed so far. Start managing it differently, or there won't be anything left to manage." She walked out. She was halfway down Center Street when she heard footsteps behind her. Quick, deliberate. She kept walking. Graham came alongside her and matched her pace. "I wrote to her," he said. "The night after I came to Harwick, I told her I was handling this myself, and that I didn't require further involvement." He was looking straight ahead. "I told her the solicitor was dismissed." Leonora kept her eyes on the road. "You wrote to her 3 days ago," she said, "before you knew about her letter to me." "Yes." She held that, turned it over twice. Why? She asked. He was quiet for half a block. The summer birds were going in the trees along the sidewalk, indifferent to everything. Because sitting across from you in that parlor, he said, I understood for the first time that I had let other people define what was happening between us. And I had been calling it practicality. A pause. It wasn't practicality, it was cowardice. The word came out plain, unadorned, the way honest men say the things they have had to work themselves up to saying for a long while. Leonora recognized it for what it was. Your aunt will push harder when she receives that letter, she said. She won't simply accept being dismissed. I know that. And Arabella Holt's family. We'll find another arrangement, he said. The Holts have more than sufficient resources to manage without this particular connection. She looked at him, at the side of his face, the set of his jaw, the particular quality of resolve she had seen from him before, on the 2 or 3 occasions when he had finally stopped weighing something and simply chosen. This doesn't resolve everything, she said. I know, it doesn't. There are things I haven't told you. Things that will change the shape of this. I understand. You don't, not yet. She looked back at the road, but you will. He glanced at her. Then let me, when you're ready. She held his gaze for 2 full seconds. Then she looked forward again and they walked to where she had left her car, in something that was not quite silence, or rather, a different kind of silence than the one that had filled her parlor 3 days ago. Not the heavy, unspoken kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled. The kind that lives between people who have said the hardest thing, and are still, improbably, walking in the same direction. She told him 4 days later. She sent a note to the Whitfield Inn the evening before, 4 sentences, asking him to come to Harwick in the morning, saying she had something to tell him, saying she preferred to say it at the house and not at the inn where the walls had ears, and his aunt's shadow still lingered somewhere in the corners. She signed it Leonora Ashford, her full name, the way she had not signed anything in months. He arrived at 8 o'clock without the briefcase, without the document, without any apparatus of formality. She noticed all 3 of these things and filed them carefully. Nell was conspicuously elsewhere, visiting her sister in the next town, at Leonora's quiet request. The house was theirs alone. They sat in the parlor, the same chairs as before, but nothing on the table between them, except a pitcher of water and 2 glasses, because it was already warm, and she was practical. I'm going to tell you something, she said, and I need you to hear all of it before you say anything, not just the beginning, all of it. All right, he said. And I need you to understand that I am telling you the complete truth, not the version that positions me most favorably, the whole of it. He met her eyes. I can do that. She took 1 breath. I'm expecting a child, she said. The silence that followed was the longest one she had ever sat inside. Not the stunned blankness of something completely unexpected, but the silence of a man who had suspected something and is now confronting the reality that suspecting and knowing are 2 entirely different experiences. Graham did not move. He did not look away. He sat with both hands on his knees and simply looked at her, and whatever was happening inside him was happening somewhere beneath the surface, in the part of Graham Ashford that had always been the most real and the most inaccessible. How long, he said. His voice was careful and low. Dr. Pemberton confirmed it 12 days before you came with the papers. I'm approximately 10 weeks along. She kept her voice even. The timing is from February, before you left. He absorbed that. She watched him do the arithmetic, the dates, the months. February, when they had still been under the same roof, in those last careful weeks before Rowena's pressure had become impossible to ignore. You knew, he said slowly. When I came with the papers, you knew the entire time. Yes. He exhaled, a single breath that carried something enormous in it, the sound of a man's entire understanding of a situation restructuring itself. Why didn't you tell me? Because, she said, I knew exactly what you would do. He looked at her. I knew that the moment I told you, you would close that briefcase and put the document away and tell me we would work it out. She held his gaze. Graham, I believe you would have meant it in that moment. But I also knew that 3 months from now, or a year, you would look at me and see the woman who told you about the child at the precise moment you were trying to leave. And you would wonder whether you stayed because you wanted to, or because I made it impossible for you to do anything else. She did not look away. I will not be the woman who trapped you, not even with the truth. His jaw worked. His hands had tightened on his knees. He was breathing slowly, deliberately. The way he breathed when something had hit him hard, and he was managing not to let it show. He stood, not in anger. She had learned to read his anger, and this was not it. He stood because he could not hold what he was feeling and stay seated. He crossed to the window and stood with his back to her, and she let him. She had handed him a hard truth, and she owed him the time to hold it. "You could have used it," he said, facing the window. "Yes. Any woman in this county would have used it. I know. My aunt certainly expected you to." He turned back, which is why she was so determined to find out before you could. He looked at her across the room, and she saw in his face something she had not seen there before. Not admiration, not quite yet, but the raw material from which admiration is made. "Why didn't you?" "Because I have watched women spend their whole lives being kept," she said. "Kept in marriages they didn't choose, by information or obligation, or the simple fact that they had no alternative. My mother was kept. My Aunt Eleanor was kept." She held his gaze. "I would rather raise this child alone in this house, with my father's books and Nell's company, than raise them inside a marriage, where every time you look at me, you are wondering what your life might have been." Graham crossed back from the window. He did not sit. He stood close enough that she had to look up slightly to hold his eyes. "I came here with that document," he said. "I sat across from you and described the solicitor's argument and the quarterly allowance. I had convinced myself it was the right thing, the kind thing." His voice had a different quality now, stripped of its usual management. "And you sat across from me, and you didn't cry, and you didn't beg, and you didn't use what you knew. And I have spent 10 days trying to understand why that was the most disturbing thing that has ever happened to me." She tilted her head slightly. "Disturbing," he said. "Because it meant you had already made peace with losing this marriage. That your own dignity mattered more to you than keeping me." He looked at her steadily. "That is not something a woman does if she was ever trying to trap anyone." She held his gaze. "Your aunt believes differently." "My aunt is wrong, flat. No qualification around it. My aunt has spent her entire life believing that any woman who marries into money has a scheme, because that's the only framework she has for understanding why a woman would want anything at all. The contained, pressurized anger of a man who has understood something about himself that he does not enjoy understanding. And I have been letting her frame this situation. I have been letting her frame you. That is inexcusable. And I'm not going to dress it up as anything less than that." She looked at him for a long moment. "This child is real," she said carefully, "and the fact that I'm telling you does not obligate you. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you because you had a right to know, and because Rowena Caldwell was closing in on the truth and I would not allow her to be the one who told you." She held his gaze. "But I'm not telling you so that you will stay. I'm telling you so that you can make a real choice. With all of the information. For the first time." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "And if I choose to stay, what does that look like?" "It looks like this," she said. "Knowing I will never let you manage me. Knowing I will call things what they are, including when you're wrong. Knowing I am not a quiet wife who asks nothing and is grateful for whatever form of attention she receives." A pause. "Knowing that I am, as your aunt has probably mentioned to you on several occasions, considerably more trouble than Arabella Holt would ever be." Something crossed his face, quick, involuntary, gone before she could read it fully. "She has said something very much like that," he said. "Several times." "And?" He looked at her directly, fully, with the whole unguarded quality she had seen from him so rarely and valued so highly. "And I have been starting to think," he said quietly, "that trouble, as my aunt defines it, might be exactly what I should have been looking for." Leonora looked away toward the window because she needed one moment's privacy from that very direct gaze. Because she could feel something she had been managing for months simply letting go of its management. Like a door she had been holding shut, finally allowed to stand on its own. She looked back at him. "There is still your aunt," she said. "I know. And when she finds out about the child, she will try to use it," he said. "I know how she works. She will not succeed, not this time." "You'll need to hold that position when it's not easy," she said, "not just when it is." He reached across the space between them and covered her hand with his, simple, untheatrical, entirely sincere. "I know it," he said, "in my body, not just in my head." She looked at their hands, then at his face. "All right," she said. Not surrender, not relief, just all right. The beginning of something that might, handled carefully and without illusion, become what it was always supposed to be. The trouble with Rowena Caldwell did not come from the direction either of them expected. It came in October, on a Tuesday morning, when Leonora's cousin Prue arrived at Harwick unannounced with the particular rapid knock of someone who has been walking fast and thinking very hard. There was talk. A woman in town whose husband did business with one of Rowena's contacts in Hartford had been saying that the child was not Graham's, that the marriage had been effectively dissolved when the pregnancy occurred. Leonora stood very still inside the wave of something not quite rage, not quite fear. The animal response to being wronged in a way specifically designed to take from you the thing you cannot defend without making it worse. Graham was in the study when Prue told them. He listened without interrupting. His face did something complicated and controlled while Leonora told him plainly, without softening. When she finished, he said, "Who is the source?" Prue told him, "A contact in Rowena's Hartford legal network." He was quiet for 4 full seconds. Leonora counted them. Then he said to Leonora very quietly, "I need to go into town." "Not alone," she said. "This is about me, my name, my child. I will not wait at home while you manage it on my behalf." She held his gaze. "We go together." He looked at her, then he nodded once. "Together," he said. They drove into Harwick that same afternoon, unhurried, visible, on the main road in the full October light. They called first on Reverend Marsh at the Congregational Church, her father's oldest friend, who had known Leonora since she was 8 years old, and who had married them in this same town 2 years ago. He listened to what she told him. He looked at Graham. He looked back at her. "You want me to say what I know," he said. "When you're asked," she said, "only that." He studied Graham for a long moment, with the assessing look of a man who had heard a great many things said in earnest, and had learned to distinguish between the kind that would hold and the kind that wouldn't. "All right," he said. The talk did not stop that week. Talk never stops all at once. It diminishes. It loses confidence in itself as counter-evidence crowds in. Reverend Marsh said what he knew when 3 parishioners asked him directly. Prue, who had a sharper tongue than Leonora when she chose to use it, said what she knew to 2 of the county's most efficient social networks. And Graham Ashford, who had been quietly present in Harwick on 3 separate occasions that week, and was known as a man of few public words and reliable character, told the county magistrate, a man who had known his father, that the story was false, and the magistrate accepted this without further question. The story didn't die. It became less interesting than its refutation, which was always the more effective outcome. November settled over Harwick with the first cold nights and the particular quality of light that meant the summer was finished. Leonora was 5 months along now, past the point of any concealment she might have attempted, not that she had ever intended to attempt it. She was sitting in the front room on a November evening, with a book when the child moved for the first time. She went very still. She pressed her hand against her side and felt it again, faint, unmistakable, the small interior percussion of a person announcing their presence. "Graham," she said. He looked up from the desk across the room. She did not say anything else. She simply held out her hand. He came. He sat beside her. She took his hand and placed it where hers had been. They waited. It came again. Graham's face did something she had never seen it do, not in the careful months of their courtship, not in the difficult days of July, not in any of the honest conversations of the months since. It simply opened. All the way, without guard or management or performance. Just a man feeling something so large that his face could not find any shape for it, except complete openness. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he said, very quietly, to his hand, to the small presence announcing itself in the November dark, "Hello." And Leonora, looking at his face, felt the thing she had been managing for months, the thing she had pressed down and been practical about, and held at arm's length and examined skeptically, simply stop requiring management, simply become what it already was. She was in love with her husband. She had probably been in love with him since considerably before July. She had been too busy surviving the consequences of that love to attend to the love itself, which was, she recognized, exactly the kind of thing her mother would have done, and she had promised herself she would not. She did not say it that evening. She was not ready to say it yet, and readiness mattered to her. Saying things before you were ready to mean them fully was its own kind of dishonesty. But she stopped managing it. She said it in January, 3 days after the baby came, a girl, born on a Wednesday morning with more efficiency than Dr. Pemberton had expected from a first delivery, while Graham wore a track in the hallway floorboards with the focused anxiety of a man very capable of controlling most things who had absolutely no control over this particular one. Nell managed everything with the authority of a woman who had attended a great many births and found the accompanying drama largely unnecessary. She came out after 2 hours and 20 minutes and said, "A girl, both fine," then went back in before Graham could ask any of the 7 questions visible on his face. He came in when Nell let him. He sat beside the bed and looked at the child, small, dark-haired, extremely certain of her own importance despite being approximately 5 hours old. Then he looked at Leonora, who was tired in the deep and specific way of someone who has just done something very difficult and cannot yet fully believe it is over. "She has your determination," he said. "She is 5 hours old," Leonora said. "She hasn't determined anything." "She has determined she is here," he said. "That seems sufficient for now." Leonora looked at him, at his face in the January afternoon light, opened the way it had been in November, without guard or performance or management. "Graham," she said. He looked at her. "I love you," she said. "I have loved you for, I don't know exactly when it started, before July, possibly before April." She held his gaze. "I didn't say it because I needed to know that you were choosing me and not just responding to circumstances. I needed to know the difference." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes were doing the thing she had learned not to look away from. "I know the difference," he said, "and I have been choosing you since the morning I came to Harwick, and couldn't say yes when you asked whether I wanted this marriage to be over." He covered her hand with his, the same gesture, simple and unhesitating, that had become the most honest thing he ever said without words. "I couldn't say yes because it wasn't what I wanted. It has never been what I wanted." "All right," she said. Not the careful, provisional all right of July, not the beginning of something all right of August, the full and final all right of a woman who has decided, with complete information, clear eyes, and her own agency entirely intact, that this is precisely what she wants. The baby made a sound between them, not a cry, just a sound, the sound of someone who is present and intends to keep being present and would like this noted. "Hello," Leonora said to her, the same word Graham had said in November, through her hand, in the dark. "We've been waiting for you." Years later, when people in Litchfield County spoke of the Ashfords of Harwick, they did not speak of the unsigned document or the quarterly allowance, or the rumors that had circulated for 2 weeks in October before withering under the weight of plain evidence. They did not speak of Rowena Caldwell's visits, or the Hartford solicitor, or the motor car that had come up the drive one July afternoon, carrying a briefcase full of someone else's decisions. They spoke of the family itself, of the way Graham Ashford had moved his professional base from Hartford to Harwick, because his wife had asked to be included in decisions. And he had said yes and meant it every day after. They spoke of the small lending library Leonora established in the church hall, her father's books and her own, free to any woman in town who wanted them, because she believed that women who could read were women who could not be so easily managed. They spoke of the annual dinner at Harwick, where tenant families and town families ate at the same table, which was Leonora's idea, and which Graham implemented without being asked twice. They spoke most often of the girl, dark-haired, willful, reading at 3 and arguing at 4, absolutely certain of herself in the way her mother had always been certain, with the additional advantage of having been raised by 2 people who had learned, at some cost, the difference between obligation and love, and who had chosen love, loudly on purpose every day they had. That was how it had always been meant to be, not found, chosen.